Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the world, and welcome back for another Hornet Security webinar. This one focusing on From Chaos to Compliance, the modern toolkit for simplifying M365 compliance headaches. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and with me, I've got Paul Schnackenburg. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Andy. How are you?
Good, good. Hey, it's, what is it, 10 p.m. where you're at there in Australia?
Yep, and it's 8 a.m. where you are in the US, I think.
It is 8 a.m. bright and early, truly a global webinar here going on multiple time zones. And for all of you joining us, multiple time zone as well too. So appreciate you all joining us today to talk about everyone's favorite topic, compliance, right? We're going to get into that whole discussion. So, but we got a lot of stuff to get through. So I think let's dive right in here and talk about our agenda. So we're going to start with some introductions. Myself, Paul, Hornetsecurity, and then we're going to talk about, again, everyone's favorite topic, the burden of compliance on IT teams. And it's a burden. It's a burden for sure. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that claim. From there, we're going to get into considerations and tools for compliance in M365. So we're going to talk about some of the features that are actually baked into 365 that can help organizations with compliance, at least those larger organizations. Paul's going to get into that. He's got a lot to talk about there. I'm going to give us a demo of Purview Compliance Manager, if I remember correctly, right, Paul?
Yep.
Sounds good. Looking forward to that. And then we're going to cover how third-party solutions can help, and I'll be showing our very own brand new Hornetsecurity Permission Manager. Really cool product, so I'm excited to kind of give you guys a demo of that. And then we'll do some wrap-up and Q&A at the end. Real quick word about the Q&A. If you do have questions, be sure to get them into that questions form inside of GoToWebinar. And if we can kind of stop organically as we're going through the content, we'll try to answer your question then and there if we can. If not, we got a Q&A section at the end of the webinar specifically where we can cover those questions. So be sure to get those items in. So again, some quick introductions. Again, my name is Andy Syrewicze. I am a security evangelist here at Hornetsecurity. I've been in the industry for 22 plus years now, actually, I think it is. So I'm also part of the Microsoft MVP program in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, I am kind of still in lurker mode out on the infosec.exchange Mastodon instance, or you can just go to github.com/asyrewicze. That has all the different ways you can get a hold of me on the web as well. And then, Paul, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks. So that's me. Well, that's me a few years ago. I had a little bit more hair then. It's rapidly receding still. So I've been in IT for a really long time. I've started with 286 computers, which used to be a great way of introducing myself. But anybody younger than sort of 30 now, they're just looking at me. What's a 286 computer? It's a long time ago, basically.
Very much so.
I'm originally from Sweden, live in Australia. I've been here for 25 years, and coincidentally, my little business that I run here is going to turn 25 at the end of this year. You can reach me on Twitter there or on Mastodon as well, or on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, which would be fine as well. Yeah, that's me.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul, and congrats on the 25 years there for Expert IT Solutions. Very cool. All right, so a little bit about Hornetsecurity. We are the leading cloud email security compliance and backup provider for 365, and kind of our main product focuses on 365, which is what we're talking about today, right? And kind of that flagship product is the 365 Total Protection. It covers all aspects of security for 365, spam, malware detection, encryption, signatures, disclaimers. We're going to be talking about some of that later on, right? And that portfolio, we do have 5,000 plus partners and 50,000 plus customers worldwide, kind of using that portfolio. And other couple of key things about us, all of our development is done in-house. I love being able to say that about our solutions. Our in-house support is also fantastic, and they speak multiple languages. They speak way more languages than I do, that's for sure. And we also have our in-house security lab, which I'm part of. And we really focus on kind of the 24/7 monitoring of our email traffic, continuous evaluation of our solutions, analysis, and reporting of all kinds of various threats out there. So a lot of great stuff happening in our organization that I'm always really proud to talk about. We are a worldwide company, so we do have data centers and offices kind of all over the place. So, you know, we've got offices in the UK, Germany, Spain, here in the US. We have data centers all over the place. So even have a data center there in Australia, where Paul is. A couple in the EU, some in North America. So we are, like I said, a global company. And we really got our start back in 2007. That's really when the organization got its start. And as we've come forward into, you know, the last couple of years here, the company has really been making a lot of strategic acquisitions to really round out the product set to, you know, handle security on your behalf. That way your organization can focus on what it is you do, right? And that's really what we do here at Hornetsecurity. So with that, again, we're going to get into everyone's favorite topic here in the IT department, and that is compliance. And we're going to start by talking about the burden of compliance. But before we get to that, it wouldn't be a compliance webinar without some sort of disclaimer, right? So I want to be very clear here. While Paul and I do our best to communicate, you know, compliance challenges, potential solutions, problems in the industry around compliance, the fact of the matter is that compliance is a legal and regulatory issue, right? And as such, you should verify any and all information contained in this webinar with your compliance officer and or legal counsel prior to implementation within your own organization. Hornetsecurity, nor Paul and I, we're offering no guarantee of compliance through the act of following advice or recommendations for this webinar. So I'm not the type of speaker to read verbatim from the slide, but for this particular slide, I had to. So now that we've made the lawyers in the world happy, we can move on to our content, right? So in short, compliance is a complicated topic. Be sure to check in with your internal compliance officer and or legal counsel before making any changes. So with that, let's talk about the burden of compliance regulations, and more importantly, the burden of those regulations on IT teams. Because Paul, I'm sure you've run into this as well too. It seems like so often the burden of compliance kind of falls on the IT department in some way, shape, or form. And I've seen it both ways. I've seen organizations where maybe on the smaller or the medium side, where the C-suite, you know, says, oh, hey, we need to be compliant with ITAR, CMMC. Well, I don't understand any of this. Here, IT, you figure it out, right? And I've seen that happen so many times, you know, especially in organizations that aren't privileged enough to have their own compliance team or their own compliance officer, right? So quite often that burden falls on the IT team. I don't know if you've seen something similar.
I have, and it is a problem because compliance is not something that the IT team can do, right? It's the old, hey, it's about computers, so the IT team are the people who are going to deal with it, right? You know, right. It's complex computers, you guys deal with it. And it's like, yeah, no, we can do a little bit of it, but it is a people and process as well as a technology thing, and you got to have the whole business has got to be on board, because otherwise it's just not going to work.
Very much so, yeah. That's I've seen that happen so many times. I think you said it perfectly. Is like somebody looks at the compliance regulations like, oh, this is a technology thing. Here, you guys take care of it, right? When, like you said, in fact, it's the culmination of those processes, the people responsibilities, as well as the technology solutions that ultimately help you comply with regulation controls, right? So, and the problem that I always see is that it's really a high stakes thing for many organizations, right? So I always look at compliance through the prism of the United States, because I live here and I've done IT work here for the last 22 years. And, you know, I've talked with manufacturers and certain organizations where if they were to fail a compliance check or some sort of compliance audit, they would be out of business. You know, they would lose certain contracts that account for a vast majority of their business percentage, and they would be done. You know, I mean, the stakes don't get any higher than that. So when that burden comes down on top of IT teams, it can be really problematic, and that's a ton of stress, That's a ton of work. That's a ton of time that's being taken away from the IT team to focus on other IT related items, right? To focus on this one thing. And that's what this webinar is really focusing on today, is helping you be aware of some tools that can help reduce this burden, right? The other problem with compliance regulations is that they're constantly evolving. I always pick on HIPAA, the medical regulatory organization here in the US. It seems like every time I look at HIPAA, something is slightly different, right? So there has to be someone within your organization, again, sometimes this falls onto the IT team, that is watching for changes in terms of HIPAA, GDPR, whatever the regulation is, keeping an eye on seeing if any of the controls are changing. I've kind of alluded to this already, multiple regulatory bodies. I have seen organizations that, there's a good friend of mine that works for a state-funded educational medical organization. So he's got government regulations to worry about, medical regulations, HIPAA regulations to worry about, and then there's also some educational controls that he has to think about too. And whenever I talk to him, I'm like, dude, how do you get anything done? You know, like he's just got red tape on top of red tape on top of red tape, you know? So there are these organizations that have to deal with multiple regulatory bodies, and that can be problematic, and it's a huge drain on time, right? Which we've kind of talked about a little bit already. Yep. And obviously many challenges. So what I thought I would do here is just to kind of highlight this, is just show some examples, right? These are email compliance requirements specifically. So again, we're very zeroed in on just a specific thing here in terms of compliance. Compliance is a huge and broad, very broad category. And if you look at just how restrictive some of these needs are just for email, you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about if you're not familiar with compliance requirements already. So HIPAA, I've talked about HIPAA a little bit already. You know, you are required, if you are a medical organization in the US, to protect personally identifiable information. So that would be any of your like patient data, right? Oh, you know, Andy came in and had a cold today, and we're going to notate that in his file, right? That's, you know, PII, personal identifiable information. That's hard to say. The other term you'll hear in the HIPAA space is PHI, protected health information. They're kind of interchangeable, but that needs to be protected. And, you know, how is that being protected? You know, that's, you know, email encryption, communication standards, backup and recovery, and there's a whole host of things that goes into that we're going to talk about a little bit more. CAN-SPAM, US standard for commercial emails. There's a lot of requirements here too. So email requirements, you know, you have to protect the recipients of those emails, right? And okay, how are you protecting those recipients? How are you making sure their contact information is not, you know, accidentally exposed to the public? There can't be any misleading header information. Awfully specific, right? You think about how your email headers are formatted, right? I mean, compliance, we keep talking about process and people, but that is a very specific IT thing, right? You think about your HR department, you tell them, you know, if they're doing some sort of mailer, or the marketing department is doing some sort of mailer, you're not going to go in there and tell them, hey, make sure you don't modify the headers of the mail in any specific way. They're going to look at you and be like, what the heck are you talking about, right? So that just goes to show how specific these requirements are. A couple more examples here. GDPR, you know, and in the EU, you have to have opt-in consent in order to send marketing activities at people. You know, if requested, the data of its owner needs to be deleted from the company system. So, you know, if you're marketing to a group of people, you also have to have a system in place where you can remove their data from your system, and you need to be able to prove that from an audit perspective as well. You're required to maintain a high level of IT security. So again, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about later today. And the other thing here, specific to GDPR, that often surprises a lot of people, if you are a US organization, you reside in the US, the address for your organization is in the US, and you have EU individuals and companies that you are doing business with, guess what? you are subject to GDPR as well, because you are working with individuals and companies from Europe. And that catches a lot of people off guard as well too, because, oh wait, I'm here in the US, why do I have to worry about GDPR? Well, surprise, you do. And if I just ruin somebody's day, I'm sorry, but that's the world we live in. Just another example here that kind of frames up our discussion for backup and recovery a little bit later in this session is that there are a lot of compliance requirements and controls that require data to be held onto for a specific length of time. So for example here, this GoBD compliance regulation that applies in Germany, it's a good example here in that, hey, you need to hold on to invoices and accounting vouchers for 10 years, balance sheets and financial statements for 10 years. Business and commercial correspondence needs to be held onto for 6 years. I mean, it just goes to show you all of the various controls in place. And like Paul mentioned, there's a process factor here, but there's very much a technology aspect here as well, which again speaks to the burden of compliance on IT teams. So with that said, what are we supposed to do about this? And the whole goal of this webinar is, like I said, share some tools and some knowledge with you that may help in this. And we're going to start by talking about, compliance manager in Microsoft 365. And then we'll get into some third-party stuff here in a little bit and show how and where it fits as well. So Paul, I'm going to let you take it away and tell us about compliance regulation and auditing in 365.
Thanks, mate. Now, I do want to point out one other thing about this webinar as well. We will follow up with other Hornetsecurity webinars for specific regions. So we're talking in generalities about different regulations here worldwide. We're not focusing on a particular one for a particular area, but there will be further webinars that focus on a particular geographical area. So it's not just about the tech, right? That is one area, but it's not the whole thing. Now, the whole business needs to be involved. Sorry?
I said, sorry, Paul, I accidentally advanced to the next slide for you. There you go, you're good.
Rebuilt the whole slide for me. That's all right, no worries. Now, so in my experience, so I'll mention I have a client who over the last year and a half have gone through a grueling audit and compliance regulation process here in Australia. They are I would call them a medium-sized training organization, 400 plus users. They got offices all over Australia. They deliver all sorts of training, and basically the government decided about 3 years ago that every training provider in Australia, even if they're smaller, have to comply with a particular regulation. And this nearly broke this organization, and it certainly nearly broke the IT department. They had like 2 full-time staff for something like 12 months just focused on this, and that was all they were doing. And so some of the feedback that I'm giving here is coming from the experience that they had. I was only tangentially involved, which I was very happy with because it sounded like a living hell, frankly. So knowing which controls you need to implement is step number 1. Step number 2 is implementing these controls so that you do the technical bit and the process bit if there needs to be people involved to do certain things in a certain order or whatever. Then you need to document it, right? Because when the auditor comes, if you have implemented it but you don't have a way to show that, you are going to fail the audit anyway, right? And then I think what's the challenging thing here is that you have that sort of, say, a deadline that we're going to be audited on the 30th of June or whatever, and you're building up to that. But once you get there and you get your tick of approval, hopefully, then you got to maintain it, right? And as you already mentioned, Andy, these regulations change all the time. So how do you keep up with that, right? Now, there is a little bit of good news here on the side. So the regulations are overlapping. So if you look at somebody like Microsoft, for instance, all the bits that they take care of, if you're a Microsoft 365 customer or client, they take care of a whole bunch of different things, and they are compliant with a whole raft of different regulations. They don't do different things for each of those. They basically make sure that they do certain controls that are more or less the same across all those different regulations. So by doing one, they sort of fulfill the other ones. So if you are in an organization where you have to be compliant with both this and that it's not twice the work. It is maybe 1.5 times the work, depending on the overlap between the two, right? And then you can work between them. And then obviously, if this is something new or something you have to deal with, then you want to talk to some other people who've been through it if you can, right? Like find some friends in other organizations that you can work with and get their feedback on what to do and what not to do. And one of the last things which I didn't put in a point really is keep your fingers crossed you get a good auditor, because in the end it tends to be sort of an interpretation of the auditor at the end. So
that's
Microsoft
a
Purview Compliance
good point.
Yeah, it's, like you can have one guy who's very stuck on certain things, and then you have another lady who comes in and audits you, and she's very stuck on other things. And if you focused on one but not the other, you can be in trouble. So.
Yep.
So the Purview portal is part of the overall Microsoft Purview solution, and the portal for that is compliance.microsoft.com. And you build out the next points for me there. It is available in 24 languages. So within the Purview portal, we have a bunch of other stuff like information protection, insider risk management, data loss prevention, all sorts of different things. But one of those things is the compliance manager that we're going to talk about today. Now, even if you only have like an Office 365 license, like an, I don't know, E1 or something, Office 365, not even a Microsoft 365 one, you still get Compliance Manager, you still get the data protection baseline. That one borrows from, and I had to write it down because it was a whole bunch of stuff. It takes from GDPR, ISO, FedRAMP, and NIST standards. So those are all sort of baked into this data protection baseline, which is completely free and included. And I'll show all that in a demo in a minute. Now, if you happen to have E5 licensing, you do get 3 premium templates. There are 725 premium templates, at least when I checked yesterday. They cover 360 different regulations across the world. So this is what the point is of premium templates. A long time ago, you had to sort of buy Microsoft 365 E5 licensing to get Compliance Manager and these templates, but you don't need to do that anymore, right? If you are in a particular region and you need a particular regulation, you simply buy that template. And I'm sure we're going to get a question in the Q&A window how much they are. I don't actually know, but then, like compared to the amount of money you're going to spend in man hours, person hours to work through and get ready for an audit, you have no problem. This is not going to be the big cost in the scheme of things. Now, you can then integrate with Defender for Cloud. This is pretty new, actually. So, and as I'll also show you, we've got a bunch of data connectors to other systems. So this is not just for Microsoft's systems, it's for other things like GCP, AWS, etc. And this sort of ties in with what does Microsoft do? Well, the bits that Microsoft are responsible for, you can find out in the Microsoft Service Trust portal. That's where Compliance Manager used to live a few years ago. But that's the place where if your lawyers say, well, how do we know that Microsoft is compliant with ISO or whatever other standard you have? Well, what you do is you point them to this portal, because like you can't call up Microsoft and say, hey, can we talk to your lawyers about what you actually do or not do? So this is the Service Trust portal, and that's where you can see they have regular pen tests and all those things, and you get all those public reports on everything they do and all the audits they've gone through, which is then your proof that they are compliant with, XYZ regulation. Right, I think that's demo time, Andy. Am I right?
Yeah, let me go ahead and make you a presenter so you can share your demo environment.
Aha, that's why the button was grayed out.
Yep, there we go. I just passed it over to you.
So now screen on monitor 2, that looks good. And
those of you watching, just a reminder, if you have any questions, be sure to get them into the questions form and go to webinar. We're happy to cover those.
So it's saying that I'm sharing my screen, but
yep, It's coming through, Paul. I see it. I see Compliance Manager.
Fabulous. I don't see it there though, but if you can see it,
Yeah.
I'm going to assume our audience can see it as well, and I'm just going to get into it. Now, my proper camera didn't work, so can people still see me in the video, Andy, or just my screen?
I can still see it.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit funny, folks. I'm sorry about that. My big fancy camera up there didn't work with the webinar software, so we're on a little laptop webcam down there. So it's going to be a little bit funny because I'm going to be looking over here, but you get the idea. All right, so let's start off with the Service Trust Portal very briefly. So aka.ms/stp. Here you can see all the things that Microsoft are compliant with, the reports, the white paper, pen tests, security assessments, everything here. So if you have a lawyer in your business who asks you about this, this is the place to send them. So next up, we go to compliance.microsoft.com, and the very first one underneath the home tile is your Compliance Manager. So, and let me hide that so we get a little bit more screen real estate. What do you think, Andy? Does that look reasonable screen size?
Yep, I can see
Zoom-wise?
everything just fine. Looking good.
Excellent. So let's look on the Overview tab first. And this is where you will see my compliance score when it decides to load. So my compliance score is 55. So I have achieved 13,000 odd points out of 23,000 odd points. I have 795 actions not completed, and I've managed 60 of them to complete. So this is not a tenant that is going to be very compliant with any kind of regulation whatsoever, but there you go. So then we have a breakdown down here across protect information, govern information, control access, etc. So there's about 10 different areas down here. You can see the breakdown of where my points come from. And then I have some key improvement actions in my list here, but it's sort of the top 10, right? The actual actions are under my improvement actions. But before we go there, I want to pop over to and look at the assessment templates, and then we're going to talk about assessments, and then we'll come back to the improvement actions. So this is where I can look at the assessment templates that are available to me. So there's the 725, right? And as you can see, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them. Now you can filter this view, of course, based on a product. So a particular Microsoft product. You can base it on a particular certification, and you can see those different ones there. For a second. Sorry, I didn't mean to blink that past so quickly. So you can pick only a particular one, right? Like there's a few Australian ones you could pick in here if you're in Australia. Then we have a few other ones that you can pick in there as well, right? So that's how you filter the view. And then if you pick, so these are the included templates here, as we mentioned, FedRAMP, ISO, SOC, ISO, and data protection baseline. And you'll see that they are also broken down by different areas. So there's templates for Azure, there's templates for Dynamics 365, there's templates for Microsoft 365, and there's universal ones that go across all of them. And this is important because one of the most important things to realize about Compliance Manager, this is not just a nice UI to give you a list of all the controls so that you can start ticking off what you're doing. Over 200 signals are fed into this, so that if you need to be compliant with the GDPR and you have a Microsoft 365 tenant, it will read your settings in your Microsoft 365 tenant. It can take up to 24 hours, but if you start turning security controls on that map to regulation controls, they will automatically give you the points, right? You will automatically, like if you enable MFA for everybody and GDPR says, and I don't actually know that it does, but let's say it does, that you have to have MFA enabled for everybody, it's automatically going to give you the points for it and tick it off that you've done it, right? There's also a bunch of manual controls, and I'll show those in a second, but that's important to realize, right? You pick these for the different products that you're looking for. So you pick your assessment template, and they can then create an assessment. Right, so I have the EU GDPR here. Notice this pending update. So we talked about earlier how important it is that because these regulations change all the time. Now, Microsoft keeps these up to date, but if you are in the middle of preparing for your audit, right? And you got your audit date a month from now, you got most of your ducks in a row, you're ready to go, and a new change comes out. You don't want to deal with that close to your deadline when you're about to do your audit. You're going to basically say, well, we're going to leave those, and then once we have done the audit, we then apply the changes. So you have that choice, right? You don't have to apply all of those things and then everything changes and now you're going to, you know, scramble at the last minute to get through things, right? So we can see here I have 124 improvement actions to do. Microsoft has 19 to do, and now we're going to go into the actual assessment here to look at it. So you pick, so everybody gets the compliance score without doing anything, right? That's just going to tell you where you're at. But in this case, I'm now looking at the EU GDPR. I can go in and review the updates that are available. I can see the points I've gained on this particular assessment. Microsoft has got all their points because they've done all their things, right? And then I can go in and look at all the controls. And there's a breakdown of them here. And then you can see the different controls across the different areas of GDPR. And then I can look at my improvement actions. And you can see lots of these, and you can see some of these have pending updates on them. So we'll pick a different one here. So what are we going to pick? Something interesting here. Enforce email encryption. So this is a good one that ties into what you're going to talk about later on, Andy. So
Yep.
I'm now going into a particular one here. Now, I will also mention that if you're using third-party tools to solve some of these things, you can indicate that here as well, right? So we got some information how to implement this, how to use a particular Microsoft solution to implement this, direct link to launch wherever I need to go to turn this on. And I got some overall information about it here. It's part of 2 assessments, and I can assign an action, and I'll show you that in a second. You can assign this to different people. And this is a manual control, not an automatic one. And then I can go into my testing, edit testing details. I can say when we tested it, how was it tested, whatever. I can add in additional notes, and if it's a manual control where you're expected to provide some documentation, then you can add that in under evidence. And I think that's it. Implementation status. So this is where you can say alternative implementation. You know, we're doing this through a third-party tool. Give us the points. It's planned, it's implemented, it's not implemented, or it's out of scope. This particular control doesn't apply to us. Well, obviously enforce email encryption does, but maybe you pick another one that doesn't. You can sort of out of scope that for your particular assessment. Right, so that's what I wanted to show you there. Now, I also wanted to show you the manual and the automatic ones. So if we go back to the compliance manager here, and we pop down to improvement actions. So these are the improvement actions across any particular regulations, right? So I can filter it down for the different ones here. And then I can go and say testing source manual, right? Or I can go to automatic. So if I pick automatic here, all of these that are going to show up here, right? Enable self-service password reset, enable multi-factor, block outdated ActiveX control, configure VPN integration. If I do any of these things, they are automatically going to be detected by a compliance manager, and I'm going to be shown as being compliant if I have turned it on technically. And that's of course a huge time saver, right? If you've got 200 controls to do, but Microsoft is going to mark off 120 once you've turned them on, it's going to be a lot less work for you to do as you work through it. Now we can also look at, so here I can accept all the updates, right, that I need to do because I'm not up to date here. Now let's see, I'm going to go back to assessments for a second, and and pick my reports. So if I wanted to see how good I was doing on my data protection baseline, there should be a report here. While we're waiting for that to load, I will also point out that there is a facility in here. I may not have time to demo it, but there is a facility in here to export an assessment as an Excel file. And you can also customize an assessment so that you can add additional control or change the controls that are in there, etc. Right? You can do all of that. And you can even upload your own assessments if you want to import your own. Now, if I generate a report here, I'm going to get an Excel file, I hope, which I can then use to massage my, do some data wrangling on my how far I've got in my progress on my data protection baseline assessment here. And
I saw Excel for a second, like you were dragging it to the screen.
Yeah, I know.
There it is. There it is. Good to go now.
Yeah, except it told me this can't be open in protected view. So let me see if I can.
It wouldn't be a demo, a proper live demo without one hiccup.
It's a live demo. That's the excuse we use, right? We are actually doing a proper live demo here. So now let me see if I can just unblock this file, and then we should be able to unblock. Yes, apply, okay, open up. And with a bit of luck, it will load in Excel. Going once, going twice. Oh, that's better. We're getting a white screen instead of a black screen.
It's got to parse all those rows now, right? All the controls. Yep, there we go.
All right, okay, so here I've got the whole thing laid out in a report that I can then work through. I can look at the Microsoft managed controls that they have done, and that's a nice way of working with this data. Okay, I did want to show you very briefly permissions. So if we pop over here, we also have particular permissions. So as you work with this in a large environment, right, you're going to want to have the right people do the right things. So if we look under roles here for purview, we should have compliance manager. Sort these by name. Here we go. So you got compliance manager administrators that can create assessments, etc. You have assessors, you have contributors who actually do the work, and then you have people who are just readers and who just look at what's there. And two more quick things to show you. The first one is data connectors. So I mentioned that this is not just a Microsoft and an Azure solution, or Microsoft 365 and an Azure solution. These are all the connectors that are available, and Microsoft adds a lot of stuff in here. These will also feed into Compliance Manager. So if you're using Cisco Jabber, or you're using Facebook business pages, or you're using the HR connector, very popular. That's not going to be applicable here really, but it's in there. LinkedIn company pages is in there. What else have we got in here that people might relate to? Salesforce, Chatter, ServiceNow. You might have heard of that. So there's a whole bunch of other connectors, and when you connect them in, they will help out as well. And the last thing I want to show you is what it looks like when you have been assigned an action. So if you go in and assign people, so as we mentioned, this is something you're going to be doing at a large scale in a big business. You're going to have multiple people working on this. So you can go in and assign a particular control, especially the ones that require manual work, of course, and then that's going to be sent to you. So here I have assigned myself in an action. So implement file encryption was assigned to Paul Schnackenburg, and I can then go in and view that assigned item that was assigned to me and do the work I need to do in Compliance Manager. Now, I think that was everything I had broken down that I wanted to talk about. I'm watching the Q&A. We're not getting any questions, but there's a lot here. And I suppose the thing I want to finalize wrapping up with here is that Compliance Manager is a huge help if you are trying to be compliant with a particular regulation. But it's not the be all and end all. We've got some great third-party solutions that Andy's going to demonstrate now, and also just be prepared that there's a lot of work involved here based on experience. Over to you, Andy.
Sounds good. Appreciate that, Paul. Let me go ahead and grab sharing back. Let's see, make myself a presenter again. And we'll go back to the slide deck. You should be able to see the slide deck again, Paul.
Yes, I can.
Hoping so.
Great.
Perfect. All right. So, you know, as you mentioned, Paul, there's a lot of work there. And Compliance Manager in 365, well, not just 365, across the entire Microsoft Cloud ecosystem, right, it's a huge tool. As you showed, there is a ton there. And really what I've found with solutions like that, you know, my 22 years of working with Microsoft, almost 10 of it now as a Microsoft MVP, I found that when Microsoft comes out with a product or a feature, it's really designed for the mega enterprises of the world, right?
Yeah, I think that's the truth.
Yeah, and I mean, the solution you show, while certainly powerful, it can do a lot. I mean, most, you know, SMBs, medium-sized businesses, smaller enterprises are going to look at that and they're going to be like, I don't want the resources to, one, learn the application, let alone use it effectively with all the other stuff we got going on, right? So, I mean, that's where I really see third-party solutions like Hornetsecurity plugging in, right? We tend to be easier to use, or more cost effective. Like you mentioned, you do get like, I forget exactly what it was called, that data protection baseline, I think is what it was called, right? Yep. With any license in 365, but to get the premium, the premium compliances inside a Compliance Manager, you have to have E5, which last I checked, don't quote me on this, but last I checked was $56 per user per month, which, you know, that adds up really quickly, right? So third-party solutions tend to be more cost-effective. This third bullet point maybe is a hot take, but I feel that you get better support with a third-party solution. There was a point in time where I would have said, hey, Microsoft support is awesome. You'll learn more about the problem than you ever wanted to know. Those days, unfortunately, I feel like are behind us. I don't know if that's been your experience, Paul, but the last 10 interactions I've had with Microsoft support have not been great.
It very much depends on the area. I've had some real great hits where the support has been great and they've been really helpful. And I've had some where I'm like, mate, did you even know about this product? Do you even know what you're talking about? Can you go and ask somebody else? Because even I know more than this and I can't figure out this problem. So can you please find somebody else who can help out?
That's why I called you guys. That's right. So anyway, and more specifically to compliance, I feel like third-party solutions are better at plugging in to address specific compliance needs. So I found in my experience, you know, working with SMBs, medium-sized businesses, and some smaller enterprises that maybe they don't have to worry about every single control inside of HIPAA, maybe because of how their business is structured, or maybe they only do a small subsection that is related to a specific compliancy. There's just very specific controls they have to worry about. And that's where a third-party solution can really plug in and provide just the controls you're looking for, right? So, for example, when you look at our services here at Hornetsecurity, we have a lot of services that can plug in and address compliance needs, like email encryption. Now, I always talk about email encryption through the prism of HIPAA and healthcare communication inside the US. Now, healthcare organizations are not supposed to send patient information via email, but surprise, a lot of them still do, right? And I found that there's a lot of for example, communications with insurance companies here in the States, where healthcare providers and those insurance companies are using email to communicate about certain patient coverage and things like that. So it does happen. If you are in a situation like that where you need to protect those communications, that's where email encryption comes into play, right? We can do things like, you know, PGP, SMIME, TLS, WebSafe, basically all the encryption methods that you're looking at. And when I compare us to some of the native encryption functionality that's baked into 365, we're much, much easier to use. Everything is done from a single pane of glass, simple to set up. Again, I'll say something very similar that I did with Compliance Manager and the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem. Microsoft's email encryption, while functional and useful, it's a pain to manage, right? And that's where a third-party solution can come in. We can provide value by making it easy for those organizations that may not have the training and the IT resources in order to check that checkbox for them. You know, I'm not going to spend a time on this diagram, but it just kind of shows you exactly how the encryption works. You know, those of you in this call probably know how encryption works, but this is just kind of the general layout. Another couple of things inside of our stack that really lend themselves well to compliance and regulatory stuff: signatures and disclaimers. So if you are in a situation where, like the email example, the email compliance example I gave earlier, where you have to append a physical address to every single email communication outbound, you can do that with our signatures and disclaimers functionality. So as email flows out of the organization, email signatures and disclaimers can get appended to the email on their way out. So if you have an end user that, surprise, end users are prone to forgetting things, right? We can do that automatically, regardless if they did it themselves or not, right? So if you want to make sure that physical address is going out on every single piece of email, that's what the solution is for. So, and this really ties into a lot of different regulatory compliance things, right? This particular feature is helpful for that. When we talk about protection, you noticed in, again, my examples I gave earlier, and this is kind of universal across many compliance regulatory bodies I found, is that you'll have these very broad statements, right? Like, you know, protect email traffic. What does that mean, right? It's very broad. Like, it can be, like Paul mentioned, certain auditors will interpret that one way or another. Well, that's where you kind of want to come in with a high level of protection for a given area that you're worried about. So I always use our advanced threat protection engine for this discussion, right? Advanced threat protection is kind of our more advanced email scanning solution. You know, it goes way over and above your traditional signature and hash-based scanning solutions, in that we're using AI to scan for, you know, risky behaviors. This looks a little weird. Let's look at it a little bit deeper. And I always talk about all of our different mechanisms and analysis sensors when I'm talking about ATP. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, you've got you know, we're looking at file types, XCs, PDFs, you know, Office files. Send that over to some binary analytics. We do heuristics, static analysis. We look for 0-hour threat outbreaks. Then we send it into our sandbox, which has over 500 behavioral analysis sensors inside of it. You know, is this suspect piece of mail trying to use things like anti-VM evasion? Is it you know, we got a machine learning engine that's like I said, AI. We've got AI baked into the platform to kind of look at all of the material flowing through the solution for, like I said, just kind of those behavioral things that traditional sensors may not pick up. We look at file system stuff, network traffic, process and registry monitors. Again, those are some of the heavy hitters, but excuse me, like I said, there's 500 plus behavioral analysis sensors inside of our ATP suite. And then all that stuff is no good if you can't report on it, right? Especially when we're talking about compliance. You have to be able to report on it. You have to be able to get those data analytics. That way you can prove that, hey, we're doing this stuff, right? Again, when you talk about compliance, you also talk about backup and recovery. We do have a number of backup and recovery options inside of our suite. So starting with Microsoft 365, we do have 365 Total Backup. It backs up basically all the stuff in 365 that you want backed up. So we do Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and full teams. And when I say full teams, there are some of our competitors out there that just grab the group chats. We grab not only the group chats, but the individual user chats as well. So you're covered from a data protection standpoint. You know, the example I gave earlier required that business correspondence was held on to for 6 years. this solution helps address that particular compliance requirement. And again, this is just kind of a high-level overview of what the solution looks like. I mentioned all the stuff that we're grabbing, and we do all of that through Graph, right? We're using the Graph API in the 365 platform to help facilitate that the backup mechanism. And we automatically take 4 backups a day once the solution is configured. So again, make it easy. Try to take that compliance headache away from you and just take care of it for you. One other thing that's new as of today inside of 365 Total Backup is we now have custom retention periods. So, like the slide I showed earlier in the presentation, the 10 years, the 6 years, the 4 years. If you want to set up a retention period for that data, that after 10 years that backup is deleted, this solution allows you to do that. So that's automatic deletion of old versions based on retention, plus you get automatic deletion of backups for deleted users and groups if you want as well. So if you don't want to retain the data for Bob in accounting who is no longer with the organization, you have the option to do that with our latest update. Not specific to 365, but worth a mention in terms of the compliance discussion. We do have a virtual machine backup application as well too that protects virtual machines running on both Hyper-V and VMware. And there's a number of fantastic solutions and features inside of this VM backup suite. The newest one is ransomware protection via immutable cloud storage. So we think about how bad ransomware is in today's environment. This solution helps protect backups against ransomware as well. So if you're in a situation where, like I said, you have to retain records for 6 years, ransomware comes through and wipes out your backup data, guess what? You're now in violation of your regulatory compliance, which can be a problem. And I don't know about you, Paul, I don't know many auditors that would oh, I'm sorry that ransomware wiped out your data. We'll forgive it this time. I've not seen that happen ever.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it's definitely where solutions like this comes into play. We have a number of other fantastic features here too. Augmented inline deduplication to provide major storage savings. WAN optimized replication. So if you want to replicate to an offsite environment, you have the ability to do that as well, and a whole host of other fantastic features in there. Love our VM backup product. With that in mind, though, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our newest product, actually, and that is a product that we call Permission Manager. Let me go over here and share the demo environment. You should see Permission Manager. Paul, can you confirm that for me real quick?
I am indeed. A 365 Permission Manager, and we don't have any questions, so folks, if you have any questions, pop them into the Q&A window. Otherwise, we'll continue through the Q&A section here and look at this demo, because this is you're the first people to see this.
Indeed. So this is, I spent all day yesterday tinkering with this application. This is a really cool product that's I'm happy to be able to show you. This went live in our portal just yesterday. So this tool, like all of our Hornetsecurity products, can be accessed via a web portal, just cp.hornetsecurity.com. And this is kind of your single pane of glass for consuming all of your Hornetsecurity products, not just Permission Manager that I'm going to talk about here, but up here you can see all of our different solutions in here. You've got the email live tracking, all of our email security products, VM backup, which I was just talking about, 365 total backup, everything is accessible via this web interface. But what we're talking today is about Permission Manager. What Permission Manager does is it enables organization to wrap their hands around permissions and share settings in SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. So you think about those two services. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business has really solved kind of that file storage, file sharing problem that we've had in the cloud era, right? But I was joking with one of my coworkers the other day, like when we talk about how easy it is to share in the 365 platform, it's like you get a shared file and you get a shared file, everybody gets shared files, right? at the end of the day, administrators trying to see like, hey, what's shared externally, what is shared with internal departments that maybe shouldn't have access. It's an arduous task to go through all of the various portals and configuration screens natively in 365 to try and get an idea of that. So I was going through this with our development team yesterday. There's something like 8 or 9 different views across 3 different portals to figure out, that this folder, 6 tiers down inside of the SharePoint library has a custom external file share to anyone, right? So, I mean, it's really difficult to get that type of information. And this solution sets out to solve this problem. So, as you log into the solution here, you get some very basic metrics about whether you have certain sites that are compliant with your defined policies or not. Again, this is a demo environment, so not a ton of data in here right now, but I can at least show you what this looks like. And the heavy hitter sections here that I want to show are the compliance policy view and the explore sites view. So you come into the compliance policy view, and this is where you actually define policies, groups of settings that you want to make sure your SharePoint sites and your OneDrive for Business accounts adhere to. So you can see we've got a number of different policies in here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the internal only policy and see what kind of settings we have in here. So what the solution allows you to do is to set up alerts and flag things for audits when certain conditions are met or not met in this case. So you can see here, if I want to, get a notification when a new user gets added to a group. So for example, let's say that I am the accounting department and I have a SharePoint library where I'm storing some sensitive information. And then maybe the organization also has a business intelligence team with some database administrators that are running reports. And let's say Paul, as a database administrator, is going to run some reports to us. He gets added into that group, right? Into the database administrators group, which has access to the financial SharePoint library. I can get notified then that, oh, hey, I had the SharePoint library out there, and this Paul guy now has access to it, right? So you can set up those types of alerts with audits. Same thing here, if you want to see that, hey, a new user has been provided access, or hey, there are items that are shared with everyone inside of the SharePoint library. You can do things like that. There are items shared with external users. There are anonymous links in use. You've got the public group privacy level set. You do all kinds of things like that. You can also do things like flag for certain settings at the site level. If you want to limit external sharing for an entire site, you can have things flagged for that. If you want to set the default sharing link for all sharing activities, that can be done here as well. Automatically configure guest access expiration. What does that look like in terms of days? If something exceeds that, you get a notification. There's a lot of different things that you can set inside of these compliance policies.
We've got two questions, Andy. Sorry, can I just interrupt for a second? We've got two questions. They're basically both the same question. Will Permissions Manager be part of the 365 Total Protection or sold as an add-on or separately?
So I'm just a technical guy, so I'm not allowed to talk about pricing. So I'm going to put that disclaimer out there first. But I would imagine there'll probably be a new tier bundle of some sort. Yeah, stay tuned for more information on that. You can always email sales@hornetsecurity.com for more information there as well. They're probably more prepared to answer that question than I am, but I have to imagine it'll be another bundle. And then what was the other question, Paul?
No, that's it.
Both of them. Okay, got it.
They're asking the same thing.
Yeah, and then really quick, I know we're running out of time. I wanted to mention this section too. You can set up rules for notifying people that, hey, these things need to be audited, right? So if a violation is detected, how long until we notify a site owner or an administrator that, hey, this needs to be looked at because it's not adhering to the defined policy? How often do you want to make sure somebody's coming in and doing a full audit of a given OneDrive account or a SharePoint site? You can define that here as well, or you can send email notifications when either of these things happen. So in terms of resolving these, that's where this Explore Sites comes into play here, or the to-do view that I'm going to show you in a second too. So Explore Sites allows you to do a lot of really neat things, like see across all of my OneDrive accounts and SharePoint sites, you know, what ones are adhering to policy. Red obviously is bad. So I know that this admin team site, there's something in here that says it's not adhering to policy. Same thing for you know, the prod dev site. So if I drill down into prod dev, for example, I go in here and explore, I can you know, look and get a little bit more information on what type of stuff is happening. Again, for the sake of time, I want to make sure I show you exactly these other controls here. So if I want to see just sites or OneDrive accounts that have anonymous access set up, I can do that here. If I want to see you know, SharePoint sites or OneDrive accounts that have organization-wide access configured, you can do that here. Which ones have external guest access configured, I can see that here. So Bob Sullen, I see that there are external guests that have access to it. So if I go in here and I explore, I can drill down and, you know, kind of see the folder and the tree view here. Now, that's useful if you want to see the tree view, but let's say I just want to see specifically, you know, Bob Sullen's in a compliant state, so that's a bad example. But if I want to see specifically what the problem is with a given, you know, with a given OneDrive account or SharePoint site, I can do that as well. So let's look at Ronnie Edison. So if I want to audit this, I can see that, oh, hey, you know, Ronnie Edison's OneDrive account doesn't have the default link permission set up properly, and the external access expiration is not compliant with what the defined policy is. And as you step through this, you can kind of get a little bit more information, and you have the option to fix or approve here as well too. So that's the other thing I wanted to talk about before we finish up here, is that we have the option to send emails to site owners in SharePoint, for example. And they'll get an email that says, hey, your SharePoint site for your department does not adhere with company policy. Click here to review the violations. That's when they'll be directed to this kind of simplified to-do view, and that they can come in here and they can see what all the violations look like. So for example, they can see that, hey, Ronnie has this emails to archive, has this PDF file that has an anonymous sharing link on here. And when the CISO or the IT department is looking at this information, they're probably not going to know that, is this a legitimate business case or not? They're not going to know whether this file is supposed to be shared externally or not. And this tool really empowers those department heads to be able to come in here and make that decision themselves. They can either fix it, you know, they come in here and just hit fix, and hey, you're going to remove access to this one item, and it automatically takes care of all of those permissions for you on behalf of the department head. Or if like, hey, this is a legitimate business reason, there's a reason this needs to be shared, they can come in here and approve, and all that is audited. They're signing that in blood that, hey, this is a legitimate business use case and it should be allowed, right? So really, like I said, allows you to kind of wrap your hands around SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, all those share settings. I know we're out of time, but I want to make sure I show this really quick too. This is your reports section where you can print off, you know, all kinds of site permissions, user and group access. You can generate all these reports. And I know I keep saying one last thing. There's two other things I want to show in here just really briefly. We have this quick actions section, where if there's just some quick actions, some quick fixes you want to do, you can come in here and do this. If I want to set the external sharing level on a given site, if I want to clean up orphaned user accounts that don't exist any longer, but their permissions are left behind, if you want to remove the everyone permissions or revoke access for a given user account, you can do all of that from here. The other thing that I really get excited about is this view as. So if I want to see the SharePoint and OneDrive for Business world of my 365 tenant through the eyes of Bob Sullen, I can do that, which is really handy in those situations where maybe Bob Sullen's user account was compromised and I need to see what Bob had access to, right? Or maybe I know that Bob probably has some level of access that maybe he shouldn't, and I want to see what he sees. That's what this view is really useful for. So I could talk for a whole hour specifically on this product, but that's probably a good high level overview, and we'll switch back to the PowerPoint really quick and kind of finish things up. So with that, as Paul mentioned, we will be doing some more regional specific webinars on this same topic of compliance. We're going to be doing one in the DAC region, UK, Canada, US. The only one we have a defined date for right now is the US one, which we're going to be focusing on HIPAA, if I remember correctly. That will be on June 14th. So be sure to be on the lookout for that and the other ones as we have dates for them. With that, again, well, this kind of answers the question we had earlier, doesn't it? So if you look down in the fourth column there on the right, we have permissions management and permissions alert and permissions audit included in that plan number 4. So that kind of answers the question there. I forgot I had the slide in there. So yes, there will be a fourth bundle that includes the permission management stuff. And again, if you want pricing information, feel free to email sales@hornetsecurity.com. I get in trouble when I talk about pricing. So not really, I joke about that, but anyway. A couple of resources for you. We do have 2 reports here that I just kind of want to draw attention to. So first one is our ESI benchmark report. The ESI stands for Employee Security Index. We have a security awareness service product as part of our suite of solutions. And what this benchmark report does is it takes a lot of the data from that service and showcases some really interesting findings, some behavioral analysis, what attacks tend to work, which ones don't, what kind of training works. A lot of great information in here. You can get that at the URL there at the bottom. Additionally, we also have our annual cybersecurity report that kind of talks about the 365 threat landscape, talks about attack types, you know, what attacks we expect to see increases of, changes in the industry. A lot of great information in this report as well too. And then if you're trying to jot down these URLs really quick, you can get a copy of the slide deck after the session if you want, just FYI. Paul has a couple of resources here for the compliance manager stuff as well. So again, you'll get a copy of the slide deck, so don't feel like you have to jot all of these down really quick. And the last thing I want to do before we get to our final Q&A is how would you like us to follow up? You can select number 1 if you'd like to get newsletters, select number 2 if you'd like a free trial, 365 total protection, or if you'd like to schedule a individual appointment with one of our experts, maybe to talk about the new permissions manager. So what you do here is you just put 1, 2, or 3 in the questions form, hit enter, and then we know how we would like you to follow up. So I'm going to give you guys 20 seconds to do that in case you're interested. And look at the questions form here. Paul, one question that I know comes up frequently is how do you get executive teams to care about compliance, right? It's the strange thing. You get these executive teams that are running a business and they know that, okay, maybe I'm dabbling in the healthcare space. They know they need to be compliant with HIPAA, for example. But I have run into these executive teams that are just like, we don't have to worry about that. And I get this question from IT pros frequently. It's like, hey, I know I have to adhere to these controls. How do I get them to care? Well, I always say, look at the fines, right? You and I were talking before this webinar. It's like, look at the fines. And I mean, I don't remember who it was. Not that I would say their name anyway. But if there was a healthcare organization here in the States recently that was breached and like 1 million healthcare records were exposed. I mean, there's a fine per record, if I remember correctly, and that adds up very quickly.
Very quickly.
So that's yeah, that's one way to convince them, definitely. One final question here. Will we be receiving this session video? Yes, we are recording today's session. You will get a copy of the recording and the slide deck that will be emailed to you after the session. So I know that I've held everybody 10 minutes over because I was so excited about our permission manager demo. So Paul, I want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today, share your knowledge and insights, and it's always good having you, my friend.
Likewise, it was great. And
yes.
I'm sorry I held people up as well with my long demo. So there you go.
No, it's all good. It's all good. All good information. Those of you watching, appreciate you spending some time with us today. Have a good one. Enjoy your day. Stay safe out there.